Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my matchday 5 team selection. And of course, this is the quarterfinal stage of the tournament, and we've had some surprise knockouts so far. So, for example, Italy and Austria being the two. And of course, that probably also means that a lot of our transfers will now be put around that sort of Dutch team who get to face Turkey, who so far, of course, have been a very, very poor defensive team, but of course have gritted their way towards a very respectable sort of stage here and have Çalhanoğlu back. So the big thing I would say is the Dutch probably put their best performance within the entire Euro so far within that match versus Romania. A very complete defensive performance, but also a very, very strong offensive performance as well, mostly led by Gakpo, who of course was able to even assist one of Malin's goals. Now, I think the biggest thing coming out of that is that the Dutch lineup is very likely to stay exactly the same as it was versus Romania, just given how good the performance was. Now, maybe Malin could be one of the changes within the team, but I still think that, of course, when we're looking at the Dutch, it's mostly sort of looking at Gakpo, potentially even doubling up or tripling up on their defense for this stage of the tournament. Because when I look at the next set of fixtures, the team to target really, once again, is that Dutch game versus Turkey. So when I look at my own team in matchday 4, I got 76 points. So that sent me, after the total calculation, to 260 points, 124,000 in the world. So still, lagging behind expectations, but we still have a wild card to go, which is nice. And I think the plan still is to use the wild card in the semi-finals, unless there's massive Spain rotation, which I still think is a little bit unexpected, right? Yes, of course, Olmo can replace Pedri in the starting lineup. Maybe Grimaldo can replace Cucurella, but we will be able to anticipate that by finding out the team on the deadline, and we can make transfers for that. The biggest question mark, of course, is for a lot of us owners what to do with someone like Morata, right? Morata is someone who tends to play 65 to 75 minutes per Spain per game. Now, that is not necessarily bad. For example, the reason why we took that punt versus Georgia is because, of course, we expected that to be a high-scoring game. Even 65 minutes of Morata would have been a good punt. Now, it didn't work out as a punt, and of course, it looks like Gakpo now has that sort of one-sided fixture. So when I look at my forwards between Kane, Mbappe, and Morata, I have to say that Gakpo is still an extremely exciting transfer, regardless of the minutes of some of my midfielders. Because I just think, what are the priority midfielders for me for the next stage? I think maybe going for another Spanish midfielder to replace Pedri, for example, is a good idea, but of course, I have to replace Sabitzer first. And at that sort of price point, I still think Rodri is the one at 6.5 to really look at. Now, Xavi Simons is, of course, one way to access the Dutch offense. And as I said, I think his minutes are going to be very strong. So he's definitely one player to look at. But I am a little bit capped in terms of budget. So I do think that my team probably needs a Morata to Gakpo transfer. And I think because he's the most exciting player to pick from in that Dutch offense for the time being, that Morata to Gakpo transfer more than likely is going to be nailed. Whether it's going to be worth a -4, I think is probably out of the question. I probably won't -4. The situations that I'm sort of looking at is maybe just leaving Guehi out, ice cold, replacing Morata, replacing Pedri, and replacing Sabitzer. That's one option for me. The alternative, of course, is if, let's say, Pedri starts anyways, I can just replace Guehi, Sabitzer, and Morata. So that's sort of the general consensus here when I look at my team. Not exactly the best fixtures for Costa, right? I think Portugal, in my opinion, will probably lose to France, but I'm happy that I have Mbappe. I probably don't need to necessarily extend on the French team now. As I said, I think the teams to target are the Dutch teams, and so all my 3 free transfers are going to be focused towards either the Dutch or the Spanish, who have also come out quite recently as actually one of the teams favored to progress. Now, if you're looking for a defensive transfer, I just think that, unfortunately, with the English team supposedly moving into a back 3, yes, of course, that sort of increases the appetite for a clean sheet, but I still have to say that Dutch matchup is a lot nicer, and I still think the clean sheet odds are going to be better for the Dutch, and you have better players at ball recoveries as well, right? So far, we've seen that Stones hasn't been particularly good. I think Konsa is most likely to play, and of course, if England move into a back 3, I guess Walker could be better at ball recoveries, but we already own Walker. So the way I see it, if I'm ever to focus a defensive transfer, it's most likely De Vrij first, just because he actually has more minutes than Ake. We've seen, for example, Ake for Van de Ven as a substitution. Now, that does give Ake potentially an earlier clean sheet lock. However, it also means reduction in terms of ball recoveries. And as you can see in the most recent games, De Vrij has also come out quite heavily on top, even had more ball recoveries than Van Dijk in the previous match, where he got 9. And as we've been saying so far, of course, as the games in the tournament get tougher and tougher and closer, your attacking fullbacks are going to have less opportunities to attack, but your center backs are going to have consistent, in my opinion, attempts to get ball recoveries. So I do really like De Vrij as a transfer option. But that's sort of my match day 4 reflection. As I said, I think France most likely favored to beat Portugal, so not that interested in either team. Spain a little bit favored versus Germany now, but both teams most likely going to score. So if you're ever going to, let's say, spend money on midfielder, I think a Spanish midfielder makes the most sense given the price points that they're at. And in the forward position, it's really those Dutch forwards in Depay and Gakpo who are the most interesting to me. As far as clean sheet odds, if we just quickly move on to match day 5, I've taken clean sheet odds from Rob T FPL. He's basically shared these clean sheet odds, which have been cleansed from market, from SpreadX, and effectively he's shown that, of course, the Dutch team are most favored right now in terms of clean sheet odds. They have the highest percentage. Then actually it's France, but we don't really want to go into the French team, in my opinion, just simply because at the end of the day, I think I'd rather back the team with better clean sheet odds and just intuitively the better fixture as it stands with the Netherlands right now. And of course, with the French team, I think one thing that we've seen so far is, for whatever reason, their center backs haven't been amassing too many ball recoveries. And part of that could just be that they dominate a lot of the ball. And of course, Conte probably has a big role to play in that. So that's why I'm not that keen on going for more French players. I think English players make sense, as I said, but I'd still rather back the Dutch team. For that reason, of course, De Vrij is probably, as I said, the defensive pick that I like, on top of Van Dijk, who a lot of people own. Dumfries also have had a really good game versus Romania. So if you do like that sort of attacking return, given that, let's say, the Dutch have really good attacking odds this week, then, that's obviously another team to target, really. As far as these sort of attacking goal projections as well, before we jump into it, Rob T's also shared his sort of player goal projections. Now, this only takes into account goals, so it doesn't really take into account things like assists, and obviously there's a huge man of the match aspect to the game as well. So, for example, when you're watching Gakpo and Depay play for the Dutch team so far, I think it's very clear that Gakpo is a little bit more decisive with actions. Depay is also constantly involved, right? He's taking corners, taking free kicks as well. But generally speaking, I think Gakpo has obviously been much more impactful in this tournament and just simply looks like the better player between the two of them. So there's obviously a qualitative judgment to be made as well. Plus, the assistive game could be a little bit more beneficial towards Gakpo, despite, as I said, Depay taking corners and even some free kicks. Also, what we've seen here is that Simons, for example, is quite high as far as midfielders. Musiala remains high. Gundogan, not even in this list, and part of that is because he's lost penalties. So, of course, as we can probably expect, betting markets have sort of reduced Gundogan's expected goal share. Whereas, on the other hand, you can see that some of the Spanish midfielders are still doing decently within this bracket. Some Turkish midfielders as well, like Arda Güler, but keep in mind, of course, this projects 90 minutes. So, out of most of the midfielders who are in affordable prices, I still think that it's okay to consider players from, let's say, Spain's midfield. Ultimately, players like Rodri or Fabian Ruiz, I think, are totally fine still to go with. And that's sort of my opinion right now in terms of the goal project. As far as obviously the rest of my team, as I said, very happy with Mbappe, Kane. Probably do want to make that upgrade from Morata to Gakpo, because the key thing about Morata, of course, is his minutes will be reduced. So the betting odds always imply that Morata will play, let's say, 90 minutes. He won't, and he probably will play a little bit less than that. So it does make sense, in my opinion, to still make that transfer up to going towards Gakpo. So what is going to be my final team selection here? My final team selection here is going to be using 3-3 transfers right now. As I said, I'm expecting to make that Morata to Gakpo transfer no matter what. I don't really mind taking a hit per se here, but I still think that it's very likely Pedri could start again and then Cucurella will start again. I don't think the Spanish team will have too much overarching changes, but as I said, it is possible that Pedri can be replaced by Olmo. So that's something that I'm looking out to. However, Sabitzer is a bigger problem for me, because I still think Pedri will come on as a substitute no matter what, whereas obviously Sabitzer just won't play, and the same with Guehi as well. In this case, because I think I'm going to be using a wild card anyways, it does make sense for me to replace Guehi first. Pedri is the one that I'm least concerned with, because I still think that between him and Morata, both of them will have pretty poor minutes. So I'd rather get the higher upside asset, which in my opinion is Gakpo, than, let's say, Xavi Simons over Pedri. So for the time being, what I'd like to do to sort of balance my money is to go Gakpo and to go Rodri as well. The reason why I'm going for Rodri is because I like the ball recovery aspect in a tougher game. I also like the fact that he is our penalty taker for Spain, and ultimately, as you can see, he's been able to produce an open play as well, just very much like Man City, where even in tougher games, he will find himself in pockets and he will eventually move into positions where he can make a difference. And in this case, Rodri has in the previous match in the tournament. And I'm not saying that I'm expecting that to happen again, but just that we have good bases for Rodri to be a good pick here. So first transfer that I'd like to do is Sabitzer to Rodri. And then the second transfer I'd like to do is Morata to Gakpo. And then the third free transfer is, once again, as I said, depending on that Spanish lineup. If we find out that Pedri and Cucurella is benched, I probably might actually just have to exercise a wild card. And the wild card that I'll probably go with is very similar to the wild card draft that I shared. But assuming that Pedri and Cucurella will play, my next transfer will be to sort of replace Guehi. And in my opinion, I've got the chance to either go for Dumfries or I can actually go for De Vrij. Now, the reason why I don't like Ake, as I said, is because he gets subbed off a little bit early. So even though that might be a little bit better in the sense that you can actually expect, better ball recoveries, for example, or better clean sheet odds from Ake because you can get subbed off early, I don't like the fact that you're losing out on ball recovery. So I do really want to go for De Vrij here. I think Turkey are a team that actually turn over the ball quite a fair bit. And I do like the idea here of just going for two of the center backs who get ball recoveries and just going for De Vrij, saving a little bit of money in the bank. Now, I could obviously have gone for Simons as well in the midfield, but at the end of the day, I think it's a qualitative judgment, right? Simons is someone who's also prone to being subbed off a little bit earlier for the Dutch team, and Rodri is someone who's going to get more minutes. If we go into something like extra time, Rodri is someone who's definitely going to stay. Simons is definitely someone who's going to be taken off. So that's a small little qualitative judgment that I've made after watching, of course, the sort of round of 16 matches where, as you can see, for example, when Pepe goes into extra time, much more chances for ball recovery. So therefore, I'm going with Rodri in this situation, particularly since it's a tougher match, probably even higher chances of getting into extra time. So we're going here with Gakpo, with Rodri, and Simons. And for that reason, of course, my draft will end up looking like this. It'll be Kane, Mbappe, and Gakpo up top, Bruno Fernandes, Pedri, Williams, Musiala, and Rodri, and then Walker, Cucurella, De Vrij, Cancelo, Van Dijk, and the goalkeepers will be Pickford and Costa. The only thing I'll say in terms of captaincies is we ultimately only have two captaincies within this match day. What I'd like to do in the first match day is probably go for a Rodri captaincy, and that's simply because I think both teams will probably score in that match. And between, let's say, France and Portugal, of course, I think Mbappe is an interesting captaincy option, but as you can see as well with the sort of market implied projections, the team goals don't seem to be particularly high. So for that France versus Portugal game, part of that is because France and Portugal have been pretty poor on the offensive side of things within this tournament so far. And I'm expecting that it can be, once again, another very cagey match, very sort of back and forth, but potentially, of course, you can't really choose necessarily which way that game will go. We could have one goal make the difference. And of course, I don't really have, let's say, an amazing Portuguese defender here. If I had Pepe, I might consider him a little bit more because, of course, the ball recovery aspect of the game is definitely there. However, I think Rodri, as I said, in a closer match where even though Spain are actually a little bit favored to beat Germany, he can actually go into extra time, can get you extra points with ball recoveries. He could still take a penalty, and he's still relatively active in open play as well. So I'm going with Rodri here as my captain. And of course, in day two, I think the captaincy here is probably going to be Gakpo, to be honest. Most one-sided matchup. I think he's been brilliant in this tournament so far. Yes, of course, he doesn't have the intangibles like penalties, like set pieces, but at the end of the day, he's been a very brilliant attacker, and Turkey have been a very susceptible team at the back. Now, of course, great save by Gunok, so amazing, honestly, progression from Turkey, particularly with that sort of last-ditch chance from Baumgartner. But the reality is that Austrian team, when you saw, for example, in the second half, how many chances they built up, I'm just expecting that to be a very, very interesting display for Gakpo. So therefore, we're going with Gakpo captaincy on day two, and that's sort of my match day 5 team selection. As I said, I will anticipate that there might be potential Spanish changes if Luis de la Fuente really wants to jump the gun on two moves, which would be, of course, as I said, Grimaldo and, let's say, Dani Olmo. I expect Morata to stay up. But as I said, Gakpo for me is a little bit of a non-negotiable transfer. I just think he's that much of an upgrade over Morata. Will I take a hit? Potentially, but I think I don't necessarily need to do so. So I'm happy with the team as it stands. Pedri with reduced minutes is fine for me, even though I miss out on the chance to get Xavi Simons. If you want to take a hit, I wouldn't begrudge that. I think that's totally fine. But in this situation, of course, 2 Dutch transfers, 1 Spanish transfer, and that's my team selection for match day 5. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.